And we are here on the Authority Brand Podcast live. It's the first live version in a couple months due to my travels and my interesting internet experience. But today we have a wonderful guest. We're going to talk about a brand breakthrough with Margie Agin. Margie is an award-winning marketer. She helps B2B technology companies discover what makes them unique and find the words to say it. She's the founder and chief strategist of Centerboard Marketing, a marketing agency based in the Washington, D.C. area. And she's author of Brand Breakthrough, How to Go Beyond a Catchy Tagline to Build an Authentic, Influential, and Sustainable Brand Personality. Margie, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Now, we had wanted to do this a couple months ago, but my internet situation is such, we talked offline, and for those of you listening who may know that we're traveling the country, and one of the great benefits is sometimes the internet is horrible. And I've learned to look at that as a blessing.
Yeah, you actually have to turn off.
But it also gets in the way sometimes of building and helping me have those brand breakthroughs. So, Margie, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Let me ask you, let's kick things off in terms of the term, and you used it, brand personality. Mm-hmm. What is that? And it's interesting, I guess actually reverse engineering the word brand. When I talk about brand, it's so interesting when left to interpretation. Different people have such different ideas of what a brand is. And you get to that in the book about what it is and what it isn't. Oh, your brand is a logo. Your brand is a color scheme. Your brand is a website. When you look at that and you look at the term brand personality, how does that differ from my brand is my logo?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different and overlapping terms that people use interchangeably. So I think when people think of brand identity, it's more what you were referring to with the visual design, the logo, the colors, the font, and all the things that go along with that. And that is a key part, because that is the initial impact that someone might have when they see your logo, see your website homepage. Right away, the brain is sort of lighting up in certain ways when looking at the visual design or the photography, the iconography, etc. So I take it up a level with brand personality to encompass that visual part, but also your voice, your tone, your style, the things that are more about what you say and how you say it. And I kind of come to this brand world as a content strategist. So I think words first. That's just how I'm built. I've always been a writer and not a designer. So I partner with a lot of designers and kind of come in from the word side, and they come in from the visual side. And so what helps everybody work together with consistency is to have kind of that umbrella brand personality definition that guides both the look and feel and the words and the copy and the content.
Yeah, and I love hearing you talk about the words, actual words and content and message. And it's easy. So was it Marshall McLuhan in the 70s or 60s said the medium is the message? And maybe that used to be true, but now I find that so many people either discount mediums or media because people use it wrong, right? Or they use the wrong words, or they think the brand is all about the media. How do you think that's shifted in terms of the medium being the message and not the message being the message, right? Because if the message is off, medium doesn't matter, right?
It's true in that they have to work together. So, the channel, the distribution mechanism, and even as we're saying, sort of the look and feel, that has to get your attention first, right? You sort of have to hook the reader, let's just, the reader or the audience, to even get them to pay attention. So right off the bat, that has to sort of be there, be clean, be accessible, be, interesting. And then you've bought some goodwill to get them to actually read the content. Right. Sure. And we know certainly on the web, people don't read, they skim. At maybe later in a sales cycle when they're like searching through everything in a different format or a different type of mindset in their journey. They might read a white paper, or they may, sit down and consume a presentation or something in a different format. But you've got to get that empathy built first, and some hook and some attention in order to even get them to that point. So I think that, the words that you choose are a key part of that, because it's about, in as crisp and as clear as you can, getting that message in front of people so that you can get them to keep reading more and go deeper over time.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And you need both, right? Because there's some people who hook you and then it's like, well, great, all flat.
Right. And then there's nothing there. Yeah, and that's almost more disappointing because there's sort of the bait and switch. So, you've built all this up and now I'm excited, but it's all like smoke and mirrors. And so I work with a lot of technology companies on their messaging, and some are startups and some are introducing new products or to new markets, and so they're not known. And very excited about, talking about their story for the first time. And yet it's possible in some of those cases, the actual products aren't even really ready yet, right? And so there's sort of the balance of getting people excited and educating the market, and then having enough meat to put on the bone when they look under the covers. I'm really mixing metaphors there. Drawing an interesting picture, but especially when you're talking about the web or any kind of digital medium, if you think that folks that are experiencing your brand for the first time in that way, they haven't had an opportunity to meet you or your team and really, experience what it would be like to work with you or your company. And so you're in presenting a brand personality, you're essentially presenting your personality of your company, right? And describing what it would actually be like to work with you. Before people even ever have a chance to talk with you, they're forming that impression. And so you've got to sort of bring that forward well before you ever talk with people face to face. And the truth is, everyone is so bombarded with messages all the time from all channels that increasingly people don't trust brands. Whether you're in a B2C or a B2B market, because so many brands have gone forward with sort of the smoke and mirrors, kind of attitude, or just because we hear messages all the time, every day, people sort of look at companies and brands a little bit askance, but they do trust people. They trust referrals from people that they know, and they trust people that they've met, and they trust human stories. And so if you can kind of make your brand seem a little bit more like a person when they're interacting with you, even on a website, then you build that trust, and you kind of close the distance a bit between your company and your customer.
And continuing on my line in terms of being personal, being a human, right? In an age of bots, you can really differentiate yourself being a real live human. And you write that, if you're not authentic, your attempt to build a brand personality will backfire. However, I also see some people using, and Seth Godin kind of rips on people who use authenticity, not you, but some people, what he writes is they use authenticity as almost an excuse just to drop F-bombs and say, I'm keeping it real. But it's almost this fake authenticity to get likes, right? So how do you really define authenticity?
If talking with you as a person is really like that, we kind of all know people that like drop the F-bomb after every word, and they're just like, then maybe that is the authentic you. Yeah. But not everyone is funny or jokey, right? Or hip or crass, or some of the things that you see a lot of, especially smaller technology companies, kind of jumping on this bandwagon to kind of be, hipster or cool. But not every company is really like that. So you could be authentically serious. You could be authentically, warm and loving, Whatever authentic is just means that you're being sort of transparent and you're letting people see the real you, whatever that is. So getting almost uncovering an understanding of what actually makes you or your company culture unique, distinct, special, unlike others that are potentially saying the same things. What is it about you that if someone picked up, a letter that they received from you or a content piece that your company wrote, and you took the logo off of that, would they know it was from you? And how would they be able to tell that? So it comes through not just in the visual design, but in the words that you use and the way you put phrases together and in the stories that you tell and in the messages that you bring forward. These are things that are authentic because they came from your head and your point of view and your life experiences in a way that other people don't have.
It's like Gary Vaynerchuk, dropped 5 F-bombs a sentence and he does that. You could tell he probably talks that way and has talked that way his entire life. But it's funny that when you go see someone who it's obvious they just watched a Gary Vee video and are trying to mimic him, but can't do that the right way, and people may dislike Gary Vee and they may love Gary Vee, but that's just
what you're going to get. Yeah. Right. You know what you're going to get. Right. So that means that then if somebody has a, consultative phone conversation with them or brings them in to speak or something, like they know what they're buying. So you kind of want to present that same thing with consistency. Though if it's your personal brand, that's one thing. And maybe it's easier because you're only dealing with one person. Although being sort of self-aware enough to say, that's really what makes me unique is also challenging. Yeah. But when you're dealing with a company and you have multiple stakeholders, and multiple people in the organization, they're sort of defining that culture beyond just the cult of personality of, the founder or one leader. Then there's something that happens inside that organization that creates a company culture and company values and company behaviors that that kind of need to be packaged up to come through because you're presenting an entire organization, not just one person like a Gary Vee.
Right. Is it? Do you think it's an interesting time in which people get outraged over everything? I'm not even talking about political and socioeconomic thing. I'm like, whatever, and I think of some brands that came out like Peloton. You remember they came into attack over their ad last year. And then do you find that with certain brands? So you want to be authentic to your ideal clients, right? So like Gary Vee, there's some people who hate Gary Vee, and that's fine. And he may drop the F-bomb and all of a sudden a mob somewhere might decide he's dropping the F-bomb. We're going to go after Gary Vee, and I'm using him as an example, but pick a brand. It's such an interesting piece now where things that you say, which aren't even controversial, are now controversial and people are going to go after you because they want to.
Right.
You find that brands that, I guess it depends on what it is, right? That kind of, I don't want to say stick to their guns, but aren't just falling over each other to be apologetic. Where's that fine line in this? Because it's a brave new world in terms of, 24/7, instantaneous. And when one person decides to go this way or media, everyone gets on the, and it's like, oh my gosh, I feel like some people are just afraid of saying anything now, brand wise, not even political or socioeconomic,
Right. Well, I mean, even if you take sort of the socioeconomic sort of, hot buttons, out of the conversation, right? All industries have some kind of a controversial thing happening, right? Like, this new compliance standard and it's
right.
crap, or, I can't stand it, or the way that the technology was built in the past is no longer working. That's old school. It's yesterday's enterprise. And now there's a totally new way of doing things. Right. So, but some other company might disagree about that way of doing things from some kind of technical perspective, right? A bunch of engineers and developers in a room arguing about how, something should be created. Every industry kind of has its own little controversies, and it can help a brand to take a stand on something like that because it gives them a point of view and a way to differentiate how their approach or their technology or their go-to-market strategy or anything about their company is unique and special and puts yesterday's enterprise behind and now takes you into the new future. So I write about in the book different archetypes for different brands, and I think what we're kind of describing is what I mentioned in the book as the rebel kind of brand personality. So a rebel, like in a consumer market, it could be like Virgin Airlines or Warby Parker or something like that, where they're a disruptor. They saw an industry that was old and antiquated and had some supply chain that raised all the costs, and so completely flipped it on its head and did something totally different. And that appeals to consumers and buyers who also think of themselves a bit as a rebel. They want to associate with that brand because they also think that they're like edgy and different and they want to do something unique that not everybody else is doing. And it's the same in the B2B world. There are brands that say, this old technology is outdated or this old accounting process is outdated, whatever it is. And, we are a breath of fresh air and we're creating things in a totally different way, that we're disruptors. And that gets people in companies who want to be disruptors themselves, and those are their best champions because they see themselves as change makers and they want to be associated with brands like that. It works for brands that truly are change makers themselves and can, back it up again with technology that's strong or, a process that really works. But if they can do that, then that's one of the, I think, most exciting brand stories that you can tell.
It's funny. I think of when you talk about a rebel in the book, and I was thinking about, there's a comedy routine. It's probably 5 to 10 years old now. Not even 10. It's probably about 4 or 5 years old. And he was talking about Android versus like iOS and Apple, or even like Samsung. And it's how, people will get a Samsung and think they're part of the rebellion against the evil empire of Apple. Right. And he's like, you do realize Samsung's not like just some small startup somewhere. And it's funny how that rebel to outdated, rebel to
that's so true,
is going so quickly now that it's, in the old days it was like, all right, there was Microsoft, then Apple came along, but Apple was around a while. Steve Jobs, one of the things that he could do is almost insult his users. Remember the thing with the band around the phone and it wasn't working or something because it was disrupting, and he's like, then just put a band around it. Like he almost insulted him, but it was almost, he had built that, people forgave it. Like he didn't apologize for it. It was like, we'll make a new one and sell you a new one. It was kind of funny how they forgave that. But I feel like, when you look at that, like Apple's constantly it's like Samsung versus Apple, Android versus Apple, and they're competing to be the rebels when they're like
some of the largest companies in the world, right? They're not the unique niche startup, right? That they were when Apple was for graphic designers and architects, right? Like everyone in the company has to have their PC, except we'll let the design team have their Macs, and now it's not like that anymore. Yeah, I was thinking recently about how brands have to evolve over time and kind of have that self-awareness that maybe being the rebel used to work for them, but now they're part of the establishment. So an interesting example is Salesforce.com. So Salesforce 10 years ago, maybe more. I don't know if you remember this, but they had that like sort of Ghostbusters like thing with like no software. Right? They were the rebel because they were a SaaS product, and everybody else had like some behemoth ERP system that was on premise or and took an engineer to run. And they were the rebel because they put the power in the hands of other people, and it was a SaaS product. And now it seems like so antiquated and kind of cute because Salesforce is, first of all, like the established behemoth in the market. And everything is SaaS. Like there's nothing special about being SaaS anymore. That's the table stakes. So things change so much, and now their tagline or their is something like how they bring people and organizations together, because they recognize that actually they have created an ecosystem where they're the center. And actually their unique value proposition is that anything and everything links into Salesforce. So even if you create this brand personality, right, and you update the site and you spread it out throughout the entire organization, it's a living, breathing thing. So at least a couple times a year, you're taking a look at it and reviewing it. And if you've gone a couple of years without really taking a hard look at anything you put on paper or you've talked with your team about your brand personality, it's a good time to check in and just sort of say, does this still resonate? Does this reflect our company? What are our competitors saying? And are we really as unique as we thought we were? And what do our customers think about sort of this message and how is it resonating with them? So every at least couple years, there's sort of that exercise of revisiting your brand guide and updating it.
One thing that this reminds me of, I think it was, I don't know if you know Oren Klaff. He wrote the book Pitch Anything. And one of the things that he writes is this, and I'd love to get your opinion on it, is about not trying to seem, a lot of brands try to seem too different or too rebellious off the get-go. And they lead with, we are so different and transformational. And he writes that the importance of not trying to seem too different, because that scares people, but saying, oh, it's just like, once they buy it and once they want to renew, say, oh, we've transformed your life. But being distinctive but not unique, I guess, is the difference, and not being too like, you're gonna have to change all your habits and way of life in order to come over to our product. Now, when he says that, I also think about the iPhone, which was a completely transformational piece. Is there a fine line there?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it depends on the industry and how entrenched they are, sort of with legacy solutions or systems that they have, and how quickly their industry is changing. So you have to kind of read the room and think about the industry that you're in. But take like a manufacturer that maybe has some legacy systems that, if you say, it would be much more compelling to say, don't worry, we'll plug into your old system and take you along with us. You don't have to rip everything out tomorrow that you've already invested in and that you learn. Or similarly, people are creatures of habit and they themselves are worried for their own job security. And even though the change maker might be all excited, your champion might be all excited, that project may still fall completely flat if you don't get the adoption from the rest of the organization, right? So you can't just show up one day and say, now throw everything out the window. Now we have something completely new. We got to bring those people along. So adoption and making it easy for people and doing it step by step by step, all those things are important to different audiences in the sales process. So I guess I'd say it depends on how entrenched things are in that industry, how quickly they're able to move, and how much competitive pressure they're seeing. I mean, from a SaaS world, which is sort of the world I know pretty well, there's tremendous competitive pressure, and those companies are like constantly looking for new and innovative kinds of things to set themselves apart. Whereas, so 10 years ago, they maybe had one or two competitors that were companies competing with them with very similar products. Now I think the average is 10 similar competitors. So you've got to find a way to rise above that crowded space and all that noise, some of which is your products and some of which is your brand personality and some of which is sort of your approach to helping people make this transition. But there's got to be the focus on differentiation in certain markets has never been more critical. Because if you can't do that, then it becomes sort of a race to the bottom of the least expensive product, and nobody wants their differentiation to be the cheapest.
Right.
That's part of what
some
this
people do, but I think they get it wrong, right? They're racing to the race to the bottom.
We'll only keep going.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what? It's interesting because it brought up well, so Basecamp was a little bit,
Mm.
it was in the news. You talk about controversy but I've been a Basecamp customer for probably 12 or 13 years. And I've used I've used some of their other products, but their core product I've used. And one of the things that they write about, and I can't remember, it was a long time ago in one of Jason's books. I don't know if it was, I don't think it was Rework. It was, I can't remember his other book, but like one of the reasons I've stayed with it is that it's such a simple platform, the Basecamp platform, and they don't change it. And one of the things they're proud of, we get 1,000 ideas and requests a week, and we don't change it. And they're doing fine. It's interesting. It's almost like counterintuitive to everyone who's trying to compete and try, because they're competing with like Zoho, and they're competing with a whole host of other things. But at the same time, they have these other little startups that they try. They tried a CRM, they killed it off. Now they're trying email. They have an email called hey.com, and they're trying to revolutionize that. But their core product where they make their money, it's interesting. It really hasn't changed in like 12 years or 13 years. And I guess they get away with it. They're doing well. So it's a funny world, just the minute you apply a rule, it's like, wait, but
that's true.
But I think the important thing is that, they were there first, right? Yeah. And Apple could transform it because of they were in an industry that was kind of stagnant, competing for the smallest smartphone. And then they put you a computer in your hand, but they also had $1 billion of ad money to provide, which also
right. Not everyone can. No one can. Yeah, you get clients that say, just make it like Apple. Like, well, you're not Apple. You don't have that budget, and no one knows who you are. So
I always loved clients who were like, so what does a campaign cost? Or, what? How much would it cost to do a national campaign? And my response was, how long's a piece of string? It depends.
Right. Like, it's not like how much does it cost to buy a full page ad in the New York Times?
Right.
Okay, there's an answer to that, right? Because but the world isn't like that anymore.
Yeah. So, my goodness.
Yeah. Well, I think being honest with yourself is hard. It can be very hard to look at your own business and kind of get that perspective because you're just so close to it. I mean, I know in my own business that, I have to go and talk to people and kind of get that outside view in. It's so, and it happens so quickly that suddenly you're on the inside versus, looking from the outside and able to kind of remove yourself from that inherent bias.
It was like having your own kid, right? It's like you have a kid and it's like, you are the cutest kids. And then it's like, are they? No, I don't know. Maybe
everyone is above average. Yeah, I don't know about the Basecamp thing. Yeah, they're the pioneer.
Yeah.
So we kind of take it to like the different brand personalities that we kind of outline, or these archetypes in the book. They were the first one to do it. And there is something very compelling about that, to be the first. But I'm sure I bet they have snuck in some new features that maybe aren't aware of.
And it's like one of those things, right? If you live with someone and you see them and they get a haircut or they change over time, you don't really realize it. Or it's like even someone who's on the news all the time, you see them and you don't realize it. And then you look back to like 2005 and you're like, whoa, they've changed a lot. But it just, so yeah, there's different things that have changed. I'm sure if I went back to 2010, it would be far different. But it's interesting. One of the things that you talk about, and you talk about the organization and getting behind it. And in the book, you write about top-down strategy versus bottom-up. I think you call it boots on the ground. Can you explain the differences between the two?
Yeah, I think in a world of brand marketing, a lot of times when companies think that they're going to refresh their brand, they get the marketing team, maybe an outside agency, maybe a couple of other leaders from the organization, sort of locked in the room. And, that's sort of like what I call also sort of bringing it down from the top of the mountain, right? Yeah. To the rest of the organization. So it's this very siloed approach where they almost don't want to expose people to how the sausage is made. So they're cooking in the kitchen, and then everything's all polished and done, and then they kind of reveal it to the organization. This is our new brand. This is our new tagline. This is how we message. Here's your deck, right? Ta-da! The website's launched on Tuesday. Go. And the opposite of that is the grassroots. Almost it takes longer often, but that's when, it takes many cycles to sort of bring in people from these multiple departments, maybe different levels of the organization, and they're part of the building process. So you've got customer service people that have a certain perspective for being on the phone with unhappy customers, and you've got the salespeople that are your direct connection. You've got the product management team who, maybe you're getting user feedback. So you got multiple people that often disagree and have differing kinds of experiences with how they express and interpret the brand and the feedback they get from customers and what they see in the market, right? So that sort of grounds up process, we've got to synthesize all those stories and then create something. But the benefit of that is that then you have different buy-in. Well, number one, it's a little more realistic because you're hearing from different parts of the organization. So you're not just sort of thinking about it yourself. And the second piece is that when you go to sort of unveil and roll out the brand, now you have people that feel like they were part of the process, and they can kind of be your ambassador back to their team or the people they interact with to help explain why it was done a certain way. And that's really important. And you feel like much more of the organization has bought in and is able and empowered and equipped to tell that story and be a brand ambassador when they go interact with their customers or anyone that they're facing externally. And that's what I've seen many times, is that it's often where an awesome sounding brand story kind of falls apart because it's not adopted by an organization. And so the message gets inconsistent and then diluted. And half the people in the organization or more say, I don't really understand my company's brand. Then how can they possibly help be an ambassador and express that brand to anyone outside if they themselves don't even really know how to articulate it or buy into it? And so both from a sort of an employee engagement or employer branding perspective, and also for the sales perspective, you want that message to be as consistent as it possibly can. Again, so that when someone externally is talking to anyone, they feel like they're talking to a person, that your company is a person, and that it's not changing every single day, but there's a red thread and a consistency to how they interact with you. So I'm a big fan of the ground up, boots on the ground kind of strategy over the top down.
Yeah, it's almost like, oh, sorry, they didn't get the memo about our brand, right? That's not an excuse.
No, because just as we were talking about people that sort of want to cling to, the past, people have, especially if you got people that have worked in an organization for many years, they've been using their decks and using their materials for years. They've got them squirreled away, in files, and they're going to keep doing whatever they're doing unless you give them a good reason to change.
Yeah. Yeah. In the book, you write about some companies that are doing it right. Can you talk about one of those and what differentiates those from folks who are doing it wrong, or companies who are doing it wrong?
Yeah, well, so we've talked about a few so far in terms of Salesforce or even the Warby Parkers. One of the things I wrote in the book was about Slack, which has since been purchased. Right?
Yeah, by Salesforce, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm not sure what the long-term situation is, but so now they still have their own brand, and that brand has a lot of value. But you definitely feel when you're interacting even with the product Slack, in addition to on the marketing side, their website and so forth, you feel like you're interacting with a person with a defined brand personality. That's a really interesting story, not just in the colors, but what that chatbot is actually programmed to say has some personality, and they take a lot of effort and time kind of crafting vocabulary and a tone of voice
Yeah.
for all of their outward facing copy, whether it's marketing copy or product kind of UX copy. So I think that's a really, really good example of, a company that has thoughtfully looked at all the touch points and really tried to be consistent and set up an internal process. There's a little sidebar with an interview with somebody within Slack where, they talk about how they have this team that kind of comes together and evaluates the brand voice. And so that's, it's just a mark of really taking it very seriously.
Yeah. Do you ever see or do you have some funny stories, I guess, related to this of a, I'm expanding my question as I think about it, but kind of a breakdown from leadership, CEO, and between sales and branding, where they're not all aligned. And so branding is doing one thing, sales is doing another. I guess that's part of the top down versus bottom up you mentioned. But I've seen sometimes where branding isn't giving sales what they need. Sales isn't communicating the brand effectively. Do you see that, or does that not happen as much as it used to in the olden days?
No, I think it definitely happens. And it happens often when there's times of sort of change within an organization itself, right? So the one example is a startup. A startup that goes through a lot of those kinds of pains, I guess, because no one is also really sure in a startup of what's resonating. They're sort of their sphere is still pretty small, so they only had 5 or 10 conversations, with this group, or they only have this set of customers so far, and people are all new, and so there's a lot of testing that goes on. And it's a really important time where it's almost more important to be able to test and bring back the information and be willing and open to bring back the information that this didn't work at all, And so we got to and quickly iterate. So that's a different animal, its own sort of animal. It's kind of a startup environment. I'm just thinking of one example, one story where I did a workshop for a company that they weren't a startup, but they had broken off from a larger company. And so were kind of defining their own business. So they were lucky enough to have customers and people with experience, but they still needed to sort of define what they were doing in the market. Right. Sure. So this was actually, it was a marketing MarTech company that had a software, and then they also had professional services to help people really make the most of the software, right? Sort of an ad tech, MarTech kind of company. And so we had a workshop where we were sort of raised that exact point, which is, are you a technology company where we should be really leaning into the differentiating characteristics of the tech? And it's, or is it that you're experts in your industry and you're, service people who customize and, really understand the customer and then build things for them and help them implement it because of your expertise, right? So in the room, we had a lot of salespeople and professional services people that loved the services part of the story. We are our experts. We build things specifically for our customers. We're very customized. We're hands-on. We want to build into the people aspect of our business, right? Then in the room, you have the CEO who's sort of like, you always know when someone's sort of sitting back, not saying anything with their arms crossed like this. Yeah. Like, okay, he's not buying into this, but he's letting his team and his people talk, and he's hearing these things anyway. So let's say, and then sort of, I tap into him. What do you think when you're hearing all of this? And he said, yes, but it's a technology company builds a repeatable, buyable, tangible product. That's what we want to be selling. And that's what eventually we want to get bought. And that's what we want VCs to think, because they buy technology companies. They don't buy consulting professional services companies. So sort of put his foot down a little bit, but he said, look, this is the vision. This is the direction of the company and where we need to head. So just because we were there before, that's not where we're heading. from a strategic perspective. And it was very good that came out in that meeting for everybody to hear, because otherwise we would have completely gone down the road of, writing content and developing the site all about their experts and their people. We would have wasted a lot of people's time and a lot of money doing that. So better to just air it out, get it out in the room and like make the decision and then stick to it. And try that. I mean, I did just talk about people being agile and taking the information, but I think let one thing, sit for a little while and test that. That's a very big decision to make. And then within that, you can iterate and kind of test and try different messages. But when you're making a fundamental decision like that, you've got to give it a longer period of time to, to sort of percolate.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And when it comes to content, especially in the tech realm, right? There's you talk about subject matter experts and when to get them involved and sometimes the subject matter experts, while in their mind, they're very smart and they are very smart, I want to say, and they know the medicine that the patients need, right? They don't necessarily know what the patients want or the clients want, right? Yeah. So that kind of tug and pull between, hey, let's talk about what they want versus what they need. And I imagine in the tech world, that's a massive fight, right? Because there's some really smart people who are great at what they do, but
and they're excited about what they've built and, where they think things are going and why it's important. It's very much about the how with those folks. I mean, those are my people. I am not an engineer or a developer, but I talk to them every day, and I love those conversations because they understand why it's important to do a certain thing. But where we get to, and sort of the marriage between content and the subject matter expert, is really honing in on why it matters. How do we really explain the impact of staying with the status quo, right, and not doing whatever this subject matter person is recommending, and how the value of making this change is going to be measured, so that when somebody looks back, a year later, they say to their boss, and the boss asks, was this project worth it? You know what to say. You know how to answer that question. How do they measure success ultimately in their world, in their context that they're living in, which is often very different from what the subject matter expert thinks that they should be doing. So it's connecting those kinds of dots to sort of say, we're educating people with all this technical knowledge, the medicine, but we're also giving them a vision of the future so that they can see themselves in a year looking back and saying, wow, now I'm able to, it could be cut costs. It could be come home earlier and have dinner with my family. It could be compete against those other 10 SaaS companies. We got to give them a reason why all of this technical, in the weeds stuff matters.
Yeah. Someone's watching right now, listening right now, who is they're about to have their brand launch. Yeah. They're in tech or otherwise. What is the number one reason they should go grab your book?
Sometimes it is hard to know where to start. We've talked about so many things, and so many answers are, it depends. So right. So every company is different, and sort of has to go on this discovery, sort of on their own. But the book does give you a framework with exercises and activities and questions to ask and some worksheets to fill in. So it can be very actionable, and you don't have to sort of think about, well, what is the process? You still have to do your own work and kind of, well, how do you fill in the information, and who do I bring in the room, and what questions do I ask? But at least you'll have that kind of framework so that you have an easy place to start. I hope that's helpful for people. And there's actually, along with the book, there's an action guide that you can even download and kind of use as a template to kind of fill in your answers to some of these questions that get raised along the way.
Yeah. Well, we're going to put a link to your book in the show notes. Of course, I urge everyone to go out and get it. It's a great book. Where's the one-stop shop? And we'll put it in the show notes as well, of course, where people are like so interested and they want to go find more about you and the work that you do and hopefully hire you to help them with their brand
well,
launch.
Please come to my website. It's centerboard-marketing.com. And there's a lot about me. There's some free resources on there and a link to the book and so forth. So that's the one-stop shop, Centerboard Marketing. Yeah, and I'd love to talk with anyone about sort of your journey on the brand, developing the brand personality and questions that you have, and do a discovery call or a clarity call. So send me a quick note and I'd love to connect with you.
Awesome. Well, Margie, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for writing the book. It has been a real pleasure. And I urge everyone to go visit her website, go grab the book. They'll all be in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for having me. Have a great weekend.
I think I paused there. We almost made it through the whole thing with perfect internet. So I think the audio's there, even if the live stream wasn't. Thank you very much for joining.
End on a smile instead of a weird face.
Yes.
Good. That was fun.